The wind carried a fine layer of dust across the sprawling naval base as the transport truck rolled to a stop near the barracks. The sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of burnt orange and soft lavender. The day had been long, and the soldiers lounging near the gate were ready to clock out when the back door of the truck swung open. Out stepped a woman, tall, calm, her fatigues clean but unassuming. She carried a small duffel bag slung over her shoulder, the kind of bag that said she didn't need much. Her name tag read S. Walker. She didn't look nervous, only observant, her sharp eyes scanning the base like someone quietly measuring every detail. The group of soldiers nearby noticed her immediately. One of them, a burly corporal with a buzz cut, smirked. New transfer. He asked no one in particular. Another soldier laughed. Yeah, looks like it. Bet she won't last a week out here. Sarah Walker didn't react. She just adjusted the strap of her bag and walked past them toward the barracks. Every step was steady, silent, deliberate. There was something about her composure that didn't fit the image of a rookie. It wasn't pride, it was control, the kind that came from years of experience. But to the men around her, that calm confidence looked like arrogance. By the time she dropped her bag in the common room, the whispers had already started. She came from the Coast Guard, I think. Nah, I heard she got transferred for messing up a drill. Probably some officer's pet project. You know how it is, they send the rejects here to toughen up. No one asked her directly. They just assumed. She kept to herself, didn't join in the jokes or gossip, didn't seem eager to impress anyone. That alone made her stand out. In a place where respect was earned through sweat, scars, and stories, her quietness became a target. That evening during cleanup duty, the sergeant called out, "Walker, since you're new here, you can handle the mess hall tonight, alone." A few of the soldiers chuckled, watching for her reaction. She didn't flinch. "Yes, Sergeant," she said evenly, and went straight to work. By the time the clock hit 2,100 hours, the hall was empty except for her. She scrubbed the floor until it gleamed, wiped down every table, and stacked the chairs neatly. Outside the windows, the floodlights hummed over the sand, casting long shadows through the glass. Through the small window of the kitchen door, a few soldiers peeked in, whispering, "She's actually doing it. Guess she doesn't have much fight in her." "She's trying to look perfect for the officers' watch." Sarah heard every word, but she didn't stop. She had scrubbed worse floors, faced harsher whispers. Her hands moved in rhythm: clean, rinse, repeat, while her mind drifted back to a dozen other bases she'd walked through, some as a leader, others in disguise. She'd learned that you could tell more about a person in one night of silence than a year of small talk. When she finished, she stood up, looked at her reflection in the freshly polished floor, and smiled faintly. Then she picked up her bag and headed out into the cool desert air. The next morning, the barracks were buzzing. Word had spread that the base was getting a new commanding officer, an Admiral, no less, who would be conducting a surprise inspection. The sergeant barked orders faster than anyone could follow. Uniforms spotless, boots shining, beds tight enough to bounce a coin off. The same soldiers who had mocked her the night before were now scrambling to make their corners perfect. No one noticed Sarah as she quietly stepped out in her plain fatigues again, hands behind her back, watching the chaos unfold. "You new here?" one of the younger recruits asked, out of breath. "Yes," she said softly, but not for long. The recruit blinked, confused, but before he could ask more, the sound of an approaching vehicle echoed through the courtyard, tires crunching on gravel, engines humming. Everyone straightened, forming neat lines. The sergeant called for attention. "All right, eyes front. Admiral Hunter's on deck." But as the car rolled to a stop and the doors opened, a faint smile touched Sarah's lips. They didn't know it yet, none of them did, but there was no Admiral Hunter. There was only her, and by sundown, this base would never be the same again. The morning sun rose over the base like a slow drumbeat before battle, heavy, golden, and tense. The recruits stood shoulder to shoulder on the open parade ground, their boots aligned, backs straight, and hearts pounding. Word had spread like wildfire overnight. The Admiral was coming. Inspections by admirals were rare, and when they happened, they were remembered for weeks mostly, because someone always got demoted, reassigned, or torn apart by sharp words in front of everyone. Every soldier there had heard the rumors. Admiral Hunter's ruthless, doesn't tolerate weakness. If your buttons aren't shining, you're done. So they polished, ironed, and scrubbed until even the desert dust seemed afraid to land on their uniforms. At the far end of the line, Sarah Walker stood quietly among them, still in the same fatigues she'd worn since her arrival. No medals, no insignia, no hint of her true rank. Her posture, though, gave her away to anyone who knew what to look for. Straight spine, hands clasped neatly behind her back, eyes scanning the horizon like someone who'd stood on decks during storms. "Walker," barked Sergeant Dempsey, a broad man with years of authority written in the lines of his face. "Didn't I tell you to report to cleaning duty? What are you doing here?" Sarah turned her head slightly. "Standing where I belong, Sergeant." Her tone wasn't disrespectful, but it was steady, too steady. The sergeant frowned. He didn't like her calmness. "You've got guts, rookie," he muttered under his breath. "Let's see how long that lasts when the Admiral gets here." A black car approached, cutting through the haze of morning light. Its engine purred low and smoothed the sound of power. Every soldier straightened as it rolled to a stop. The doors opened. 2 officers stepped out first, scanning the lineup. Then, finally, the last door opened and out stepped Sarah Walker. Except this time, she wasn't the quiet new recruit in fatigues. She was in full dress, whites crisp, flawless, with the silver gleam of her Admiral's insignia catching the sunlight like a flash of lightning. Her medals lined neatly across her chest, her nameplate shining, Admiral Sarah Walker. Gasps rippled through the ranks like an invisible wave. The sergeant's jaw fell open. The same soldiers who'd mocked her now stood paralyzed, eyes wide with disbelief. "Eyes front," Dempsey barked automatically, but even his voice shook. Sarah walked slowly down the line, every step measured and silent except for the faint crunch of sand beneath her boots. She stopped in front of Dempsey and looked him in the eye. "Sergeant," she said calmly, "you've done well keeping this place lively." Her tone was even, but the edges of her words were sharp enough to cut steel. Dempsey swallowed hard. "Admiral Walker, ma'am, She raised a hand slightly, stopping him. "Yesterday," she said, her voice carrying across the field, "I arrived on this base as an unranked transfer. Not one of you questioned why. Not one of you asked if there was a reason. You saw a stranger and made your judgment." She began to walk again, her gaze sweeping across the recruits. "Some of you mocked. Some of you gave orders you had no right to give. And some—" She paused, glancing toward a small group who'd made her scrub the mess hall. "Thought humiliation would teach me something. You were right, it did. It reminded me how much work we still have to do." The silence was suffocating. No one dared to move. Sarah stopped in the center of the lineup. "Leadership is not about rank," she said. "It's about character. The kind of person you are when no one's watching, or when you think the person you're watching doesn't matter." A breeze caught her uniform as she turned to face them fully. "This base is my responsibility now. I expect discipline, respect, and courage not only in battle, but here among each other. Because if you can't stand together in peace, you'll crumble in war." She looked directly at Dempsey. "Sergeant, report to my office after formation. We have much to discuss about leadership standards." "Yes, Admiral," he said quickly, his face pale. She nodded once, then turned to the rest. "As for the rest of you, consider this inspection your first and only warning. From this moment on, you serve under my command. I don't care where you came from or what rumors you've heard. We start over together, but with truth and discipline." Then, with that same calm tone she'd used the day before when scrubbing floors, she said, "Dismissed." The ranks broke slowly, stunned silence giving way to whispers. Every soldier avoided her gaze as she walked past, but she noticed something in their faces, the shame of realization mixed with a spark of respect. As she reached the car, one of the youngest recruits, the same one who'd asked her that morning if she was new, hurried forward. "Admiral," he said nervously, I didn't know, ma'am. I'm sorry." She looked at him, her expression softening just slightly. "Don't apologize," she said quietly. "Just learn. The best soldiers aren't the ones who never make mistakes, they're the ones who never make the same mistake twice. The boy nodded, standing a little taller. Sarah stepped into the car, the door closing behind her. As it pulled away, the entire base seemed to exhale, the weight of the revelation still hanging heavy in the desert air. Inside the vehicle, Sarah looked out the window at the rows of tents and soldiers fading into the distance. For a moment, her reflection caught her eye: the uniform, the medals, the authority, and beneath it all, the same calm composure of a woman who'd never needed to prove herself, only remind others who she truly was. Tomorrow, she thought, the real work would begin. The next few weeks transformed the base in ways no one expected. The same dusty compound that once echoed with laughter, gossip, and lazy chatter now rang with the rhythmic cadence of drills, the bark of commands, and the sound of boots striking the ground in perfect unison. At the center of it all stood Admiral Sarah Walker, calm, unyielding, and sharp as the desert wind that swept across the training fields. When she had first revealed who she was, many had expected her to hand out punishments, maybe even discharge a few soldiers to make an example. But she didn't. Instead, she gave them something far more difficult: a chance to rebuild themselves. Every morning, before dawn, she was the first on the field. The soldiers would arrive to find her already there, standing with her hands behind her back, watching the horizon as the first rays of light broke over the sand. Discipline starts before the sun rises, she said on that first morning, her voice cutting through the chill air. And it doesn't end when it sets. Those who once mocked her were now under her direct command, running drills, rewriting reports, and enduring her relentless training sessions. But what surprised them most was that she trained with them. She didn't just give orders. She ran the laps, did the push-ups, and lifted the same heavy packs. Sweat glistened on her uniform, just like theirs. During one particularly grueling afternoon, as the temperature soared and exhaustion began to set in, a young recruit collapsed mid-run. Before anyone could react, Sarah was there, kneeling beside him, helping him to his feet. "You don't quit because it's hard," she told him firmly. "You quit when you stop believing you can do it. Get up again." The recruit pushed himself up, fueled by her words, and kept running. Others followed, their earlier resentment slowly replaced by admiration. They began to understand that her authority didn't come from rank, it came from example. In the evenings, after drills, she would gather the entire unit in the mess hall. The same hall where she had once scrubbed the floors now served as her briefing room. She'd stand at the front, sleeves rolled up, and talk about leadership not from manuals or rules, but from experience. "Respect isn't given," she told them one night. "It's earned through how you treat the people who can't give you anything in return. The world doesn't care about your title, it cares about your integrity." The room would go quiet each time she spoke. Even Sergeant Dempsey, who had been one of the most skeptical at first, now listened with the attention of a student before a mentor. Slowly, the base began to shift, not just in discipline, but in spirit. Soldiers who once avoided responsibility now volunteered for extra duties. The barracks that once echoed with arrogance and laughter now hummed with pride and order. Sarah noticed every change, though she rarely smiled. She wasn't there for praise. She was there to shape them into something better: soldiers who could stand not just under command, but under principle. One evening, after another long day, Dempsey approached her outside her office. The sky was streaked with red and purple, the air heavy with dust and quiet. "Admiral," he said hesitantly, "about that first day, I owe you an apology." She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "No, Sergeant," she said softly. "You owe it to your men. Show them what a good leader looks like." Dempsey nodded, his voice low. "Understood, ma'am." Later that week, an unexpected inspection team arrived from command headquarters. The base that had once been labeled undisciplined and underperforming was now being praised as one of the most efficient units in the region. Every soldier moved with precision, every report was perfect, every maneuver flawless. When the officers asked how the turnaround had happened, Dempsey answered simply, "Admiral Walker happened." But Sarah didn't stay for the recognition. After the inspection, she quietly left the reviewing tent and walked back to the training ground. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the sand. A few soldiers were still running laps, their faces determined, their movements sharp. She watched them for a long moment, pride flickering briefly in her eyes. A young private jogged past her, panting but smiling. "Evening, Admiral," he called out breathlessly. "We're not stopping until we get it right." Sarah gave a faint nod. "That's the spirit," she said. "Don't stop, not until perfect feels normal." As night fell over the base, the floodlights flickered on, illuminating rows of tents, flags fluttering softly in the wind. Inside the command office, her nameplate gleamed faintly in the dim light. Admiral Sarah Walker. She stood alone for a moment, gazing out at the camp. Once they had tried to tear her down. Now they stood taller because of her. That was the power of real leadership, to turn doubt into strength and shame into pride. And as the desert wind swept through the base once more, carrying the echoes of her soldiers' voices, one truth became undeniable: they would never forget the day the new girl arrived and changed everything.